This week on Quick Save the Podcast, we're looking back at why we love the Dark Souls series, tackle that difficulty debate, and discuss how influential the series has been this generation. Check the timestamps below to jump straight into the discussion. Absolutely crazy. Hello and welcome to the one, the only Quick Save the Podcast. I'm your host Mitch, and joining me is podcast regular Callum.
Greetings.
You know what's interesting?
What's that?
That Dark Souls has sold 27 million units as a series. Officially, because this week Bandai Namco revealed that it sold that many, and for a game known for like high difficulty, pretty niche. That's amazing.
It is, yeah, and that's also just mainline Soul series as well. So that's excluding Bloodborne and Sekiro.
Yeah, just the Soul series.
So just the main sort of Soul series. So that's, yeah, I mean, as you say, given that it's become more mainstream over the years, but given initially it was a very kind of niche title that had a pretty dedicated fan base.
Yeah.
Those numbers are, super impressive.
We're very much a part of that fan base. And it got us thinking just how influential was the Souls franchise the past decade. Before we get into talking about why we think this series has been really influential, I'd like to just talk about what we enjoy about the series. So my first question to you, Callum, is how did you get into playing the series? How did you hear of it? What got you to give it a go?
Yeah, so for me, it was, we were discussing before, off camera. I can't now actually place the exact year that I started, but I want to say it was somewhere around 2014. Because I believe by the time I played Bloodborne, which was in 2015, I definitely completed at least one of the games. So I'm 90% sure it was kind of 2013, 2014, so a couple of years after the release of Dark Souls. In terms of how I found out about it, I hadn't really heard anything as far as promotional stuff or really seeing much of the gameplay or anything. It was actually just a friend that had tried it out. And at that stage, it seemed like this really kind of obscure game that not many people were kind of talking about, but it was starting to build this kind of cool fan base of people that were very dedicated. And that was around the time as well that people were really trying to do lore building and stuff and speculate on what the story was about, which I thought was a really cool touch as well. And from what I recall, I didn't kind of beat it in one sitting or one series of weeks. I kind of played it, struggled with it, and kind of came back to it later, which I think is similar to kind of your experience initially as well.
I think it's probably a common thing for people who games these days sort of aren't sort of like that. They don't often say throw you into it and go figure it out.
Yeah,
of course, there's walkthroughs and Wikipedia and not Wikipedia, but specific wikis for all these games now. But when everyone started playing, it was just what is this? So I heard of it through someone at TAFE. He kept going on about it all the time. I don't get why you like this game. And then I tried it back in 2012. Didn't enjoy it at all. Found it too difficult. Everything was a bit obtuse. The controls felt clunky.
Yeah.
And all that. So it wasn't until all the hype around Bloodborne happened. I tried it a few times. I've gotten stuck at a lot of places. Gargoyles broke me early on. I quit there. Taurus Demon, which is one of the earliest and easiest bosses.
Yeah.
Got me a lot of times. It caused me to quit. But there was this... Bloodborne was the one that was I really want to play it. I tried it. I couldn't get into it the first time I played it. And then I went, no, I'm going to replay Dark Souls. I'm going to finally beat it. And then I did. And then...
And the question when do you think it really clicked for you? In terms, because we had the same experience where we kind of went back and forth and stuff. Do you remember there was a time where it clicked and you were suddenly I actually really like this game, I like this series?
I think it took to beating Ornstein and Smell that really, for me, cemented okay, I'm going to be a fan of this forever.
Yeah.
Because beating them gave me such a feeling that no game had given me, really. It was just I had to earn that kill.
Yeah.
I had to get better at the game, learn the game to eventually kill them. My build was absolutely stupid. I put so much in endurance. And then I could roll everywhere, but my weapons were awful.
Yeah, so it's very imbalanced kind of.
Yeah, so, you don't start knowing everything. So, of course, when you look back on it, it's that was really stupid. But what about you? What was the moment that really clicked?
I would say it was basically the same, because I think that was, as it was known for most players, was such a huge wall. Even for people that were decent at the game, like that's really the point of like, if you can beat this boss, like you've pretty much probably beaten the most challenging boss in the game, or certainly close to it. And so I think just because of the sheer number of attempts that it took me, and just the process of kind of gradually getting better and better at the mechanics, like that's where, when I, as you said, when I finally did defeat them, and it was this amazing sense of accomplishment, and it just felt as if it was like it was worth persevering through, like even though it was tough and it took a lot of time. It was worth it for that kind of feeling you got after doing it, and I think that's translated across all the games now.
Yeah, there isn't a lot of games that give you that satisfaction of beating it, and I think it is due to the difficulty being, like, I guess at the time as high as it was.
Yeah,
I mean, when you revisit it, they're not as hard because you've kind of more mastered the mechanics.
Yeah, and there's something even satisfying about that as well then, is actually when you get better at the mechanics and then actually get their kind of patterns and stuff down, and you actually start getting good at the game to the point where it's kind of more comfortable to go through it. Because initially it can seem that it's just like every new boss is like a wall, or like every new area is like a wall. So it can at times get a bit frustrating. Yeah. But that's been the great thing about playing the game over the years, is then like each one provides a new challenge, but you feel as if you have some sense of like mastery going in, because you know kind of the basic mechanics and you have experience playing the other games.
Sometimes they turn that on its head a bit, like Sekiro isn't technically a Souls game, but it's like, obviously if you're a fan of the series so far, going into that would be like, okay, I'm going to enjoy Sekiro. But Sekiro kind of punished you for trying Dark Souls.
Yeah.
Thing. So did Bloodborne a bit, actually.
Yeah.
But I guess that kind of leads me into, where would we rank the games? I'll do mine because I already have it in my head of where I'd rank it.
Yeah.
Which starts with Dark Souls 3 being my absolute favorite, which was cemented by the DLC being as good as it was. And, I mean, it's a pretty bullshit dragon boss. That took a while, but it just really cemented it as such a really good game that had probably the best areas and bosses, but it did lack the overall design that Dark Souls had. But my number 2 is actually Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, mainly because the gameplay is just so good.
Yeah.
Like, there are moments in that game that gave me the feeling of Dark Souls. But I'm not going to name the specific boss, but let's just say it took me a very long time, but by the time I'd beaten it, I felt like I'd mastered the game.
Yeah.
Which was like, it was sort of like everything I'd learned up to that point was kind of put on test.
Like put it to the test. It's like, can you like implement all these like various like mechanics and nail it in like one fight?
Yeah, and when you nail it, there's few feelings quite like that. So after that, Bloodborne, definitely. In terms of aesthetic, in terms of overall design, just that world is so good. Transforming weapons is awesome. Yeah, so then followed by Dark Souls. I'll just say this, like, there's not much in between these. Dark Souls by far has the best world. So interconnected. I love how it all meets up, and when you get that moment of like, oh, this is connected to here, or like...
Yeah, and so many like shortcuts and like things that you didn't realize were important until like later on and stuff, and it's just so interconnected.
It's got some really good bosses, but it does have a lot of, I guess, filler bosses, and clearly didn't have the time to be completed up to probably how they would like. So after that, I was unsure which one was my least favorite, but upon replaying Dark Souls 2, I know that there's more to that game that I enjoy than I thought I did. Yeah. It still has a lot of variation in builds, a lot of areas, but there was just too much. It was too much quantity, not enough quality. So in the early part of the game, there's a lot of just bosses that I couldn't remember. Like the last giant, the first boss, there is nothing to him.
Yeah.
And finally is Demon Souls, a game where most of the bosses weren't great, but you could see that they were there was something good there. I played it after all the others, so it's kind of interesting to take a look at where it all started.
Yeah.
The areas are awful. There is the worst swamp in the entire series. The only good one I like is Boletaria Palace, or the castle.
Yeah.
Which was quite a good setting. The bosses there were, for the most part, pretty decent. One that reminds me a bit of Ornstein.
Yeah, and it's probably more in line with kind of like the level design of like Dark Souls, like that particular level. Like it's more reminiscent of what you then get in Dark Souls.
And if they remastered it or remade it, I'd be very interested to replay it.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so that's kind of me rambling through what I like about the games. Where would you rank them?
So mine kind of on the fly, like just thinking kind of through, because there are a couple of games I haven't finished, but in terms of the ones I kind of put the most time into, I think I would still go Bloodborne number 1. Just because that game at the time just blew me away. And I think probably that was a game that really made me a convert of, I want to say probably more like generally FromSoft games or like the Soulsborne, as it's been called, type games.
Yeah.
Like you said, it had an incredible aesthetic. And I think that the move to kind of a faster combat style, I think is what I now really love, like with Sekiro as well. I think it's a really cool kind of change of pace. Number 2, I would actually go Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. I just think, again, just they kind of reinvented the combat in a way that kind of made it feel really fresh and original, but still retained elements of the original series. And I think even though I think it has the least levels overall, or like the least, at least compared to the Souls games, I think each of those areas I think are really kind of fully fleshed out and just kind of very cool. I'd probably then go... It's then between Dark Souls 3 and Dark Souls. I'd probably lean towards the original Dark Souls only because it's kind of what originally got me into it. And I think it's for a game that came out as long ago as it did, I think it's aged really well as well. But again, like you were saying, like it's very like subtle, like between these games. Like there's not like a huge gap between how much like I love some of these like over the others. Because I would have Dark Souls 3 next, but I think there's elements of Dark Souls 3 that I think did it better than all the other mainline Dark Souls games, like the combat for sure. I think it struck a really nice balance between like the slower kind of feel of like the original Dark Souls and then like the faster pace after like Bloodborne and that sort of thing. And then pretty much it would be, I haven't completed them, but it'll probably be the same as you, Dark Souls 2, then Demon Souls. Only because I think Demon Souls is the one where it does have certain things that do seem a bit dated. I think going back to it, like it's not held up quite as well. But it's still a very good game in its own right. And yeah, it's what started it all.
So I guess then, like, what's the worst part of the series for you?
That's
something you don't like.
Yeah, I would say it's kind of specific to a couple of games, but like it probably more specific. So. Yeah, I would say it's more specific to Bloodborne and Sekiro, but probably the camera. That was probably the one thing, especially with Sekiro, that at times
when it pushes you into a small room.
Exactly. When you're in like a confined space, it can make it like a real challenge. Like sometimes, like just to like get your bearings. But there's nothing that really stands out in terms of like a major... I think there are always, with any series, there are things that they could like refine and like sort of improve, but I think that's probably one of the things that would stand out.
Anor Londo's archers are the worst thing created by man. And there's a funny story about when I first got past them. You know, you can't just light it on fire in Dark Souls 1. You got to rest at it.
Yeah.
I lit it, but I didn't rest at it. And then I realized after I died... what terrible mistake I'd made. I'm like, sure, people are saying like it's not too hard to get past them. I'm just really shit at it.
And it's just so like just the force that's like in those, like it can just literally just knock you off the edge and just like just ruin your day. Like
like when you're finding the Silver Knights up there, it's really precarious.
Yeah.
So even when I played through it on remastered, I died there 20 times.
Yeah.
At least just because the Zweihander wasn't really built for it. But yeah, so
I would have to second that. That was a very annoying phase. And an otherwise very good.
There's a place in Dark Souls 2 that is like underground in this water area. Like you move slowly, there's wizards everywhere. That is another area I despise.
Right.
But how would you improve the Souls series as a whole?
Yeah, I don't know. I would say, I think one thing is just like, you've seen it get better over time, but it's just kind of the presentation, I think, as well. Like in terms of like, it's been kind of like joked about, but even things about like the animations and like, characters like speaking and things like that. I think just in terms of like the immersion, I think there was a big step up for that in terms of Sekiro. Like in terms of having more
actually moved.
Exactly. Like actually seeing,
in the other game.
Not being like just like a mannequin. And having kind of more fleshed out like cutscenes and kind of like things like that as well to kind of flesh out the story more so.
And as we said with Elden Ring on a previous episode, it's kind of like, it seems like they're going more into that.
Yeah.
With someone who can write characters as well as George R. R. Martin. What I think I would change is it's more minor, but like when you go into New Game Plus, I would like it if enemy spawns changed. I think this
Yeah.
is actually the case in some parts of Dark Souls 2.
Yeah.
I know Skull the First Sin
Yeah.
obviously changed locations of stuff, but I would like that to change in New Game Plus.
Yeah.
And like, I know
Yeah.
you can get mods for these things that do that, but it being part of the game would be better. And I think mimics changing their spawns would really mess with you, because you would be checking every chest just to make sure it's not a mimic, because you don't know what mimic, which one is a mimic. So I think that'd be very funny.
And that's where I think we were talking about before as well, like also integrating more modes like the Chalice Dungeons and Bloodborne, because I think that was a real strength of that game as like a new gameplay feature was, like it made it almost more like a, like a dungeon crawler type game where it was like, it was kind of randomized and it had these kind of like randomized levels. And even though like not everyone was a fan of it, that was actually one of my favorite features in Bloodborne, and something that really gelled well with the series.
I think as a whole. It sort of gave you a sort of endless, like if they could make it more endless, like an endless mode to push you fighting random bosses, like they could be from the whole game.
And but like, with like different move sets.
Not to mention, it had its own unique bosses. So I thought that would really increase how long these games would last, I think. And if you added like invasions to it, and like
it would give it more replayability in the sense that like instead of just doing multiple New Game Plus runs, like you were saying, you could have that element of like randomness. And
the one thing I would say is take out crafting, that part out of that area, because I think it's a good optional thing. I don't think players should be forced to do it. Because a lot of the best ways to make your character stronger is because of the Chalice Dungeons. And that's how I got through and platinumed it easier, because I did... Obviously, you have to do them for the platinum, but like, it also meant I was just so strong. And I did like the fact it was separate from New Game Plus. Its difficulty was on its own kind of thing. And I think maybe take away the ability to actually have to build them. Maybe there's something better in there if they went back and revisited the system. So I think moving on from our personal opinions on the game to what makes this series influential, which will be our opinions again. And kind of go into like what influence it's had. And clearly it's had a big influence on many games. So it proves that difficult games have a place in this era of games that are being increasingly easy and more broadly accessible. So it means games are opening up to being more difficult, and that people still want a challenge, because challenging games used to be the thing of like, I guess in arcades it was to make it so you have to pay more money.
Exactly.
But then like when you think about the NES era and some of the SNES games and that kind of era, games were really difficult. Most people wouldn't complete a game. Like, it was just too difficult. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing, but it kind of shows that difficulty is still something people want. So I guess when you kind of think about this big whole drama that came out, I think it was last year, people talking about difficulty options. And so many articles talking about games all need difficulty options. And so I guess my question is, do difficulty options belong in the Souls series? And I've read so many opinions on this matter of why you should, why you shouldn't. But what do you actually think?
I personally can definitely see the merit in both arguments. I would probably lean towards saying that there's not necessarily any harm in including a difficulty mode, in the sense that like anyone who wants to play the kind of original sort of experience as the developers wanted it, which would be the usual kind of Souls thing of not having a difficulty mode, would still be able to do that. But then maybe for people who like maybe tried the game and liked like the lore and kind of the style of the game, but found the difficulty like a bit too punishing, to the point where it kind of like put them off playing, or like they just hit a massive wall. I think having that option to have a lighter difficulty mode would be good. And it could literally just be that, like it could be that you have the standard difficulty mode that is designed for most players, and then you just have one other mode that maybe reduces certain obstacles, like maybe it like allows you it reduces like the move sets of like certain bosses, or it kind of just gives you like more perks that you can use to make the experience easier. So I personally wouldn't be against it for that reason, because I think it's always good if developers can give more choice to players, because it's ultimately like a product as well. Like it's something that consumers are buying. So if there's a demand for that, I think that's a good thing.
I mean, it's sort of interesting to say that, because there is clearly a demand for it, irregardless of difficulty options or not.
Yeah.
And I think the fan base of Dark Souls has the problem where it's like you can't beat a Git Gud. And
yeah,
I don't know if that's really entirely fair. I think obviously being built around that one difficulty, obviously New Game Plus is harder and it kind of has its own internal difficulty options. There's already difficulties kind of built into it.
Yeah.
And I kind of think like as long as there is a difficulty that is built on, basically it says the way the developers want it to be played, that's fine by me. If they balance, like, I guess a lot of problem with other games is when you think about difficulties, how do they balance them around that difficulty? And like Witcher kind of did it with enemies hitting harder, and I kind of like the idea that you hit harder as well. So I think with Dark Souls there needs to be always the one where it's like, this is what they wanted it, this is what they expect people to play it at. But for people who don't necessarily have the skill, the time, or whatever reason, they should be able to play it. And I think it's better for more people to have played the game and to have liked it than people who go, I can't. Like, I know friends of mine that just have tried these games and went, I don't really have the time to put all this time and effort into learning it.
Yeah,
and maybe
exactly.
like the world is the most interesting part of the lore is. I think it's good that people can all play it. But I do have a counter argument. The fact that it is, this always online nature with cooperation, like summoning other players, and invasions, a better excuse for a lack of difficulty options, or doesn't that really matter so much?
Yeah, that's the other thing as well, is how do you balance them potentially having a difficulty mode with like, with like invasions and stuff? Like it's the other thing, question I think too that's interesting with difficulty modes that people usually don't talk about is then if you maybe actually had a harder difficulty mode too, because they've kind of integrated that in some of the games anyway, with say like Dark Souls 2, you had like the bonfire aesthetic, which I thought was like a really cool mechanic.
That is an incredible mechanic that when we're talking about what's something we would improve, I would add those back.
Yeah, like in some form. And like then in Sekiro, you have like the demon bell that you can ring and stuff that kind of integrates more difficulty. But imagine then you also had those kind of features where you could opt in, like you had like a more kind of concrete, like harder difficulty mode too. So I think that's the other side of the coin, that it could actually open up some more freedom for players.
It's a problem with opening that up, kind of then, imagine the community then. It's like, well, if you're not playing the hardest mode, you're not good enough.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's always going to be that kind of element of like elitism, or like people that want like the purer kind of experience.
And I guess like the counter to my counter thing is that easy won't have invasions. Like easy to just remove
like it
that.
Opts out of it maybe. Yeah, like it's
obviously
an
you can't opt out of cooperation, but it could be like kind of a more offline equivalent. Like it sort of adds pausing, that the reason that can't exist is because invasions, but if the invasions aren't part of it, then
you could easily have a pause in like an offline mode, like Sekiro did.
So I think at the start, like the game recommends this harder difficulty, but I don't know if at any time, but you should be able to then be like, what if the game tells you like, are you having trouble? Yeah. Which I find is a bit...
This boss is
so you're
handed your ass to you 20 times.
You're getting absolutely destroyed, you scrub. Do you want to try something easier and like no way to reverse it?
Yeah.
So like, in a way that would kind of work. Yeah, and I think I was on the bandwagon of like difficulty options should stay away from it because it affects the balance, and like maybe not every person has to be able to play a game. Maybe sometimes there is room for games to be kind of exclusive, I suppose. But then Jedi Fallen Order, a game with difficulty options, and then friends were playing it and we were talking about it, I'm like, you know what, if it gets more people to play it, and it really didn't affect my experience, why should it matter that other people want it easier?
Exactly. And like you were saying, that there is, I'm sure, like with any game, like there's a subset of people who like otherwise might have enjoyed Souls but kind of just never got into it because of the difficulty. And maybe it's just a time commitment as well.
Yeah.
Like they just don't have the time to commit to like learning all the,
I suppose the one thing they wouldn't get would be that euphoria once you beat.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like the trade-off as well. Yeah. It's like you can play on like an easier mode, but then also it feels like less satisfying.
That's literally what it kind of comes down to. It's like, it is kind of a trade-off. Like,
yeah.
But to be able to play it, I think is worthwhile anyway. So I think its influence on, like, that was a big topic. So difficulty options being more of a topic these days is sort of fascinating and was really brought forward by Dark Souls' existence. Because there's a game that, in an era that difficulty options are very much a thing and games can be as easy as you want them, it was an outlier that did something different.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like alongside that as well, like it's not attributable probably only just to Dark Souls, but I think it's a big part of it is a resurgence just in more difficult games in general. In the modern era, like we were saying, like it's more and more common for like games to quote unquote like hold your hand and stuff and like show you even like an element of Dark Souls that makes it difficult is also the lack of direction. Like it's not just the combat, it's the fact that you're just thrown into this world and you have to kind of figure it out on the fly. Like there's no like quest log, there's no tracking, there's no like golden
compass,
path.
there's no
exactly.
Yeah, so it was kind of interesting that all happened when, you know, there were games that were just like, when you think about Fable 2, it had a golden marker, but when you think of Dark Souls, there's no real direction, and I think that is kind of what might have helped a game like Monster Hunter. A game where it doesn't have it does have a story, it's kind of crap. But like, it kind of gets you to the point that, okay, so there's this world that you don't 100% need to understand everything, or you just need to create your kind of own adventure in a way. Like, yeah,
and I think that actually worked as a strength because especially with Dark Souls, like with that series, like it built up this real community around it as well, because like it almost gave this sense of like everyone was kind of figuring it out together, because like there was nothing necessarily in game to point it out, so you had to sometimes rely on like looking up wikis and like other players and stuff like that to figure out kind of where to go and what to do. But definitely I think it has been part of like a broader resurgence in terms of like much more difficult games, and I think now there's more games that are like starting to see like difficulty as like a strength. Like instead of seeing it as like something that makes it really obtuse, like it's more about like, this is actually a reason to play this game, is that it's really challenging and that it takes a while to master it. Like it's not something that you can just pick up and beat straight away.
It feels good to beat them. Like when you beat bosses in a hard game, it always feels more rewarding than beating bosses in like an easy game where it's just like, well, I didn't really have to try too hard.
Yeah, and where it's full of just like QTEs and just like these things that, like
which is something Dark Souls did change. Like when you think of a game that had quick time events, God of War, like that was its thing. And then God of War, the new one came out, its combat was very deliberate. It wasn't really combo based.
Yeah.
It was very Souls-like. And that was very much a good thing. I mean, obviously Dark Souls doesn't have an axe you can throw and return to you, but it definitely dropped what action role-playing games in a 3D space used to be.
Yeah.
To what they are now. And then you think of the subgenre, that sort of, or genre even, of Souls-like games that have come out after it, like Lords of the Fallen. Wasn't great, pretty good co-vein anime Dark Souls. Surge, Star Wars, even a Star Wars game. Kind of took on elements.
Yeah.
Like basically bonfires, which are meditation spots. You lose a resource when you die. You can get it back by killing an enemy. Yeah. And it had that it actually felt more like Sekiro in that it was very parry-based in terms of combat. So it's kind of weird to see like how high up, like clearly developers were huge fans of this series more so than like went off sales, because obviously they've gone like, okay, this is how we can make games.
And it's like, I think to developers as well, like they're always, it's less kind of competitive than you would think. Like they're often like looking to like other studios and stuff in terms of like inspiration and things that they can do. And over the years, like more like the games you mentioned, and even like to an extent like Assassin's Creed and stuff, like you've seen these kind of like elements of the combat in Dark Souls, the series as a whole, like crop up in other games, which is a good thing, because I think you'll probably agree, like probably Dark Souls now has kind of set the standard in terms of like that combat. Like it's almost hard to kind of go to other games because it has set that bar so high in terms of what combat is like in an action RPG.
At least now, like when you think of the games that used to be that, like God of War, it was like they're all pretty much the same combo based. You had that thing in the corner, which is your score. Yeah. And like that was what these games were. This is what, like even Star Wars games like Force Unleashed, that was basically God of War with quick time events and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's sort of funny to see Jedi Fallen Order kind of do and move on with how God of War moved on.
Yeah.
It's just sort of like just these weird scenarios of just, we've seen this happen before, of a game that redefines what that kind of game is. And God of War definitely defined it. And now Dark Souls has redefined it. So I think its biggest influence has been on its just influence other games in its genre.
Yeah. And it's literally, as you said, like it's now almost seen as like a flattering thing. Like someone will say like, this is like the new Dark Souls version of this, like in this genre.
The Dark
like
Souls
like it's almost now, it's such a favorable comparison now to make to that series.
It's kind of a bit of a meme.
Yeah. Like, and it has effectively, you know, spawned its own, like you were saying, its own subgenre of like Souls-like games, or Souls-like games, they're sometimes called.
Yeah, so I guess when we think about what it's done is, it's proved that difficult games are possible.
Yeah.
It's brought out a discussion on full-on difficulty and like how that should be done in games.
And I think also the other thing, just in terms of their kind of like, just their growing kind of like influence and legacy, I think it's only going to go probably from strength to strength. I think like you've got the sense that over time, like the production values and just the scale of their games is only increase and increase. So I think they're only likely to have more influence on other studios and other games to come, because especially last year after they won Game of the Year, which like shocked us like so much. Like I still was convinced
Check out the video.
It was read out that it was going to be Death Stranding. Like that was such a huge thing as well, like them actually getting the recognition for doing that, and it kind of felt like the culmination of like all these games that
so it's exciting to see where
they go to now.
Well, what Elden Ring does.
You
check out our previous discussion on that, but I think it's time to get a bit Metacritical. Each and every episode we take a casual stroll onto Metacritic to bet
through
on
Metacritic lane.
Metacritic lane, Metacritic Street, to bet on what overall score a game will receive at launch. So this week we're betting on Minecraft Dungeons, a game I think is a perfect fit for a Diablo-like game, and Mojang's first game under Microsoft. I think it looks fun, but it's not up to what we think. It's what the big reviewers think. So now it's time to reveal what score we think it'll receive. I'm going to go first and go with a 78, because my confidence in that studio isn't that high. I'm hoping that they prove me wrong, that Mojang is more than just a one-hit wonder with Minecraft. And just to prove like what they're capable of. So I'm definitely excited to see what it'll be. So
I'm going to go similar to what I was going to say. I'm going to go 82. I think, I agree. I think I'm a little bit skeptical in the sense that like, I think it could probably go either way. Like it could be a little bit kind of gimmicky, but I think based on what they've shown, I think it has the potential to be pretty good. And it seems like a pretty natural fit for the franchise as well. So I'm going to say 82.
Last week we bet on the Wonderful 101 Remastered, with myself choosing a lower number of an 83 and Callum going with an 87.
Probably a bit optimistic.
Yeah, so, well, we're a bit off. I mean, you especially, because it got a 73. 72%. Yep.
Wow.
With the highest score being from IGN, would you believe? Yeah, with a 90. So that kind of like I think we said that we had kind of seen IGN's review, and it wasn't. It was
that maybe
not,
like colored our like perception. Yeah.
It was not at all like that. So we're a bit off the mark, which means for the first bet, I get a point, and we're going to work out eventually what these points actually add up to.
Yeah, it's building up to something.
Up to something. Look forward to whatever that thing will be, but I think that's about it for this episode. Thank you so much for joining us. I've been Mitch. Thanks for joining me, Callum.
Thanks for watching.
Let us know what you think in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this episode, like, share, and subscribe for more of the podcast. Hope you'll see you again, as there's always a podcast to save. Quickly. Goodbye, everybody.